All right. Well, hey, good morning, everybody. Streams look good. Everything's going solid. Hooray. Good morning, good morning, good morning. And what a wonderful day. Go ahead and hit those like and subscribe buttons. Drop a comment, whatever platform you're on. If you're on Facebook, drop a comment. YouTube, definitely drop comments and whatnot. Twitch as well. You know, do your twitchy things, whatever it is you guys do. And good morning. It's going to be a great day. It's Saturday the 19th, August-ish, give or take. I don't know. The world just keeps seeming to like spin by and swoop by, and it doesn't stop, does it? It just keeps dories. It just keeps swimmings. Yeah, that's gonna be that kind of day. All right, good stuff. All right, well, we are on the 17th lesson here into the book of Genesis. This is Battle, Rescue, and Melchizedek. We're looking at chapter 14, all of chapter 14 today. So another one of these sections to where we just hit an entire chapter. They're not super long. These chapters that we've been doing they're not super long. This is 24 verses. It's kind of on the border of how many verses we like to do, or I like to do in one sitting, because it's you get kind of to the point where you're I don't know about skimming, but like you're glossing over a few things, and you know, you might not be hitting as much as you'd like to, unless it's just straight up names and lists. And some of this kind of is, and when I was going through it, all I could hear is like that movie trailer voiceover guy in a world. You know, you get down into that deep dark in a world, and it goes, but that's okay. It's an interesting section. Okay, this is an interesting section. We've kind of built in with the life of Abraham up to this point, and we've already seen Abraham struggle with his faith a little bit, and he had to pull back, run to Egypt, and try to get some help, and we've seen his faith bolster and rebuild, and now we're going to kind of see some of the fruit of that and see if that is something that is continuing on, or if that was just kind of a one-time deal. And so we're going to get into this. A little note: if you've been with Sip and Study for a while, you might recognize the name Melchizedek. We'll mention this again later, but you can always go back. It's in Hebrews that we went and did almost a deep dive into Melchizedek. Again, not a perfectly deep dive, but we hit different things then than we're hitting today. And so if you want to get back into Hebrews, it was Hebrews the 7th lesson or episode, whatever you want to call these. I think it was, the 7th one that we had that more of a deep dive of who is Melchizedek. And that was, of course, in correlation with who's Jesus, you know. Go back and forth on that. So, all right, but let's dig into this. The reading of the scriptures, 24 verses. When I read it, it feels like more than 24 verses, but it really is only 24 verses. And I think a lot of it has to do with some of the names of these kings are names. Wow. I mean, they're names. All right. Chapter 14 of Genesis through the English Standard Version. In the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedor I knew I was going to stumble. All right. Kedorlaomer. There we go. Maybe just slow down. Kedorlaomer. All right. Quit trying to sound like I know what I'm saying. King of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim. These kings made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shimber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. And all these joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they had served Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated the Rephaim and Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzim and Ham, the Emim in Sheva Kirathim, and the Horites in the hill country of Seir, as far as El Paran, on the border of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and defeated all the country of the Amalekites. Wow, this is a day. And also the Amorites, who were dwelling in Hazazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, I almost want to start this all over again. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim with Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. Now, the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their provisions, and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, of Aner. These were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and all the women and the people. After his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shavah, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave 1/10 of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap, or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. All right, so that was brutal, but such is it. This breaks down into 3 basic sections. At least that's where we're breaking this down. Verses 1 to 12, it actually breaks down to a lot more, but we're just cutting this into 3 spots. The battle, verses 1 to 12, the rescue in 13 to 16, and then 17 to 24, this is the introduction in the area of Melchizedek. Well, it's Melchizedek and the king of Sodom. But Melchizedek. Let's dig into this. 1 to 4. In the days of, and we get into the kings. Now, the kings here are listed in alphabetical order. Okay, so Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim. These kings made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zor. And all these joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. You get on verse 4 as well. 12 years they served Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. So basically, you get this powerful set of Mesopotamian kings. Because, and again, this is one of these areas I'm okay with kind of giving the basic rundown and the basic details. I don't think we need to go into all the history and all of this stuff per se. Want to give you the basics of what's going on here. So really the narrative on this shifts dramatically, at least the way that this portion of Abram's life and what goes on here, it changes. The storytelling method, and I say that not to dilute what's happening. Okay, yes, this is the Bible. We don't want to dilute this. I don't want to have people think I'm just saying this is nothing but a story. But the way everything becomes a story, right? Life, when you tell history, becomes the story of. Okay, if you learn about Abraham Lincoln, you're going to listen to the story of Abraham Lincoln's life. Okay, so it becomes, when you tell history, it becomes a story. And so this is the same piece with this. When you go back, the way this portion is being told is drastically different than the surrounding areas of the scripture. This is done in a way of just talking about a battle. And well, realistically, multiple battles, lots of battles, but essentially a war that was waged, and it is done in a very matter-of-fact orient. In fact, if you notice, until Abram comes back, there is no mention of God in this. This entire section is just a straight-up matter-of-fact, here's the history of these wars. This is what happened, and this is how these wars happened and where things went, and here you go. Now, it is not just a narrative like that and a history piece like that, but it's written in such a way that we're given more or less direct timelines and dates with this, because it's talking about in the days of these kings, and these were known kings. Some of them were known kings. So we get some information with that. Not to mention the way that it's listed actually fits in with certain time frames and how this was done. Okay, so we'll get to that. But essentially right now we get the setup of 4 powerful kings who were in and through Mesopotamia. Essentially the regions where these guys were from later becomes Babylon and Ashur, but it also includes what is now modern day Iraq and Iran. Okay, so these were some pretty powerful kings from some pretty powerful regions. Well, they had an arrangement. Some of this you got to understand the way this is listed and read. Okay, they had an arrangement or a contract with these 5 minor kings. Now, these 5 minor kings, they were able to abide with this contract for 12 years, basically paying tribute, right? These lesser kings were under the protection of these major kings, and they were in agreement. So if something happened, the major kings would come in and bring their forces in, and they would go to battle for them, with them, yada, yada, yada. And they were okay with this, and they paid their tribute, essentially, for 12 years. And then on the 13th year, they rebelled. And on the 14th year, the major kings had enough, and they came in to take what at least what they felt was theirs. Okay, there's your basic setup for what's going on here. Okay, that is your basic rundown of the situation. You get your, what today we would call your bully kings, who give me all your money. You know, we want this much money. You're going to pay us this much, or we're going to come in and wipe you out. But if you pay us, not only are we not wiping you out, but you come in under our protection, and we're going to stand with you, and you're part of the conglomerate, and this is a good situation for you. So just pay your dues and enjoy being part of this. And the 5 minor kings eventually said, we can't handle this anymore, whether they couldn't pay it or just wouldn't pay it, and they stopped, and we have war. We have a bad situation that happens. Now, historically, when we look into how battles are listed and how this is done, usually with this type of history, you would have King Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, waged war with these underlings. They wouldn't necessarily list out all of the other kings who came and was part of the major conglomerate that worked together. Historically, when we look through narratives and we see when was this type of listing done, when were all of the conglomerate listed out like this, it fits in with the Middle Bronze Era. The Middle Bronze Era, which is kind of on the cusp. It's on the outer edges. Now, when we say it is in the Middle Bronze Era, there's usually blendings of time inside of this when things like this were done. And that more or less fits in with the time frame of Abraham's life. So this actually does work. The Middle Bronze Era doesn't overlap perfectly with Abraham's life, but there's enough blending room to where it's right on that halo. And so it is very possible and very realistic that, because it was spoken history, right? It was oral history, that had just been passed down in such a way that it's already been there. So this works. Historians don't seem to really have an issue with any of this, okay? And so it fits roughly with the life of Abraham. So this works. Now, a couple other fun notes on this one. Amraphel used to be considered, at least in the 19th century, so the 1800s, historians in that era believed that Amraphel was actually Hammurabi, which was a great king of Mesopotamia. Most don't believe that anymore. I don't really know why they consider that he might have been Hammurabi, and I don't really understand why they stopped believing that it was Hammurabi. And I think that's part of the issue. There wasn't much to back the fact that they thought he was Hammurabi. They just kind of labeled him that way, and it got spread. And then people turned around and said, we can't really figure out why this was happening, and they just kind of dropped it. And so he's not considered anymore to be that, but there was a time in history where they considered him to be Hammurabi. Fun fact. Arioch is the name of the is the name of one of the sons. I believe it was actually the fifth son, but one of the sons of King Zimrilim of Mari. It's, I think, circa 1750 BC. Okay. Kedorlaomer, and also spelled with a K. Some Bibles it's CH, some Bibles it's K. Some commentaries goes back and forth. He's actually the leader of the group, even though this is listed in alphabetical order of the major kings. Kedorlaomer, getting through this, is very obvious. He is the leader. He is the head of this conglomerate and going forward. And title, this is really a pretty standard Hittite royal name. So that one just fits well with the time frame and everything. Now, archaeology does show evidence of 5 sites near the eastern side of the Dead Sea that they believe are these 5 minor kingdom cities that are uprising against the 4 major Mesopotamian kings. Now, in verse 4, we do see the 12 years they had served. This served, the way that this is written in the Hebrew, it really does indicate that they just paid tribute. It's not necessarily that they served as in fought. They might have fought alongside of, if the war got bad enough and they needed the extra reinforcements because of that tribute, they might come and say, hey, you need to come and fight with us, and they serve with that. But realistically, and most likely, they just paid tribute for protection, and as long as they paid that, they were fine, and the rebellion, because they either couldn't or wouldn't pay it anymore. Now, 5 to 7, this is where this part of the narrative gets interesting, at least to me, in a historical context, both in a military campaign and biblically. This becomes a very interesting section. 5 to 7. In the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zulzum in Ham, the Emim in Sheva Kirathaim, and the Horites in the hill country of the Seir, as far as El Paran, on the border of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to in Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and defeated all of the country of the Amalekites. I don't know why I keep wanting to say Amalekites. Dyslexia wins, I guess. Amalekites. And also the Amorites who were dwelling in Hazazon Tamar. Okay, why is this interesting other than the fact that I obviously can't say these names? Well, they're doing a couple different things here. They're doing a couple different things, and we lose so much of this in our history, especially here in the West, because we don't. How do I want to say this politely? Maybe I don't even want to say it politely. Maybe we'll just be direct this time. Anybody who knows me, I'm direct most times. We don't always like to give the scriptures credit for saying what it is they say. We want to take it and kind of blend things and say, well, historically, well, we can't necessarily. The West was built in modernism, and we need to be able to back everything with all of the histories and all of the sciences. And if we can't back it completely with all of the sciences, then we try to twist the Bible into saying something that it doesn't necessarily say. I think there's times where there's history pieces, and yes, we need to take history as history and see if we can validate this. By the way, the Bible is essentially the only historical text that is this long, that has been around for this long, that we can actually find all the evidence in archaeology of the different major battles. We can see the evidence of the different cities and where they were. We can see the evidence of all of this stuff through archaeology. It's an amazing piece. It's an amazing, accurate piece that we go through some of this. Even when we sit there and say, well, this might not be the region, is it because the understanding of where that region happened changed? And then we find the evidence of that, and bam, all of a sudden things fall into place and go, wow, this fits. So perhaps we should allow for the text to say what the text says. Now, to get an understanding of this, because again, these were things that people pre-Jesus, and honestly, considerably pre-Jesus, understood. And that understanding was maintained up until the intertestamental period. Wow, I cannot speak today. This is going to be really fun to edit. Intertestamental period. In between the testaments, right? The Old Testament and the New Testament. It was maintained up into that, and then some of it, we still see the teachings and happening in the New Testament as well. Anyway, why is this interesting? Well, let's go through this list, okay? Let's go through this list and see what's really going on. Because if you get further into the scriptures, these four major kings go and start taking out peoples that God eventually says to take out. And why is that? Well, if you follow the path lines, you're going to see. First of all, they go in and defeat the Rephaim and Ashtaroth Karnaim. Let's ignore the wheres for a moment, okay? Let's not be so concerned with the wheres. Just get the idea, the understanding that where they go when they do battle is they take care of all of the places around Sodom and Gomorrah and all the other three city-states. Okay, they take out any potential allies that could rise up with them or that could rise up in the future with them. They start taking these groups out. That's a very smart military campaign, by the way. So militarily, genius, at least for the era. Okay. Who are the Rephaim? Well, let's take a moment and let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 20 and 21. At least 21a. 20. It is also counted as the land of the Rephaim, formerly lived there. But the Ammonites called them Zamzummim, a people great and many, and as tall as the Anakim. The Anakim, sons of Anak, were considered giants. The Rephaim were giant clans. You had the Nephilim, the Rephaim, the Anakim, the Zamzummim, the Emim. Are you catching a trend here? They came in and they wiped out the giants, according to the historical text, okay? According to what is being said here, the point that is getting across, read this. They defeated the Rephaim. Then they turn around, and in Ham, they defeat the Zuzim. Now, the Zuzim are the same as the Zamzummim, which was also in Deuteronomy 20:21. The Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Ammonites called them the Zamzummim, which were as tall and as powerful as the Anakim. Okay. Then they go to the Emim, or the Emim, in Sheva Kerathim. Okay. Well, who are these guys? Go to Deuteronomy chapter 2 again, but go back to verses 10 and 11. So go back 10 verses. The Emim formerly lived there, a people great and many and as tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they were also counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites called them Emim. I'm catching a trend. Are you catching a trend? They're killing the giant clans. They're going into these villages and they're killing the giants, those who are big and powerful, to show a couple different things. One, to show their own might, and to two, prevent any other kind of uprising or people who could come and help and fight with Sodom and Gomorrah and the others. It's a big deal. All right, well, let's keep going. Verse 6, and the Horites in the hill country of Seir, as far as El Paran on the border of the wilderness. These were, there's debates as to who the Horites were. They're listed with a bunch of people who were basically the giant clans. So were they potentially giants? It's possible. We don't know. These ones were most likely cave dwellers. They were natives and native cave dwellers. Some would say they're like aboriginal cave dwellers. And considering they're listed with immense warriors and giant clans, they must have been a very imposing military force, like fierce fighters. Okay, the Horites. Then, in verse 7, then they turned back. So they went and they did this one loop, and they killed all of these different people, and they turned back and came to Mishpath, which is Kadesh, and defeated all the country of the Amalekites. Pause here for a second. This is the land, and this is a point of reference that Moses is making to the people. This was the land and the people inside the land that would, in the future, be the Amalekites. We know that this is not the Amalekites, and we know this for a reason. The reason is very simple. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Esau. Esau has Eliphaz. Eliphaz has Amalek. Amalek's people become the Amalekites. The Amalekites were the first people to attack the nation of Israel after they crossed the Red Sea coming out from Egypt. So, and then a huge, vicious warrior class that by the way, were bad people, and they were considered a vicious warrior class who, even in some of the Hebrew texts, were considered to be sorcerer warriors. There was like a myth around them that they had the ability to transform and transfigure themselves into the types of animals and come in and come around people in the appearance of animals and then vanish by going back into animal form. Interesting stuff. It's interesting. That's what they believe. But we can see in Exodus 17, 8-9, you can also see what was going on there. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose from us and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I stand on top of the hill with my staff, with the staff of God in my hand. So we see what's going on there. Now we can also go back with the cave dwellers of the Horites, because I missed that verse. It's Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 12. So really it was like Deuteronomy 2, 20 to 21, 10, 11, and now 12, even with the Horites. It's the same basic listing. It all gets accounted for inside of Deuteronomy. The Horites also lived in Seir formerly, but the people of Esau disposed them and destroyed them from before them and settled in their place, as Israel did to the land of their possession, which the Lord gave them. Okay, keep going a little further here. So they turned around and they destroy and they defeat all of the people that were in the land that becomes the land of the Amalekites. Amalekites. Man, I just can't say that word. And also the Amorites, who were dwelling in Hazazon Tamar. Well, who are these guys? Let's take a look at Amos 2:9. Yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and who was as strong as the oaks. I destroyed his fruit above and his roots beneath. Church history includes the Amorites, you guessed it, as giants. Powerful warrior giants as well. So just look at what's actually going on here. These people rebel. The 5 kings rebel. The 4 kings of Mesopotamia come in and say, not going to happen. They wipe out any potential support, any other groups that are going to come in, anything else. And to one, shows their military superiority. It shows how strong and commanding they are. And then 2, it makes it to where these 5 other kings don't get any extra support, and it helps to prevent future uprising. Now, it might actually cause future uprising on its own because you just wiped out people who weren't doing anything. But for the short term, at least, it prevents that in fear. In fear. All right, keep going. Because that's a section where we could just sit and live on for days. All right, 8-12. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim with Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. Now, the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their provisions, and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abraham's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. So this is just a quick summary of this battle between the 4 kings versus the 5 kings. The 5 minor kings go out, do battle, strength to strength. The way this is written is it's written in a way that is your typical battle of the era. Forces line up on one side, and the other forces line up on the other side. They clash and meet in the middle. Whoever has the most men or the strongest men or the best weapons and defensive weapons, shields, things of that nature, armor, wins the day. Well, the 5 kings lose and lose royally, and it sounds like quite the slaughter. Now, some of the men either fall into these bitumen pits. This is like a tar pit. Okay, they either fall into the bitumen pits, or they throw themselves into it, or they are thrown into it, any which way. Whether they're trying to escape, that is, they would rather die in the pits than die by sword and the spear, or who knows, maybe others threw them in there. It's not very clear. Like, this is just gets kind of gleaned over. This just is tossed in there as a side note as well. Like, hey, people also fell in the pits, so careful, I guess. Whatever. Now, the 4 eastern kings then plunder the land to take their tribute, and then some. Take whatever they can grab. Why? Well, if you're not going to pay your tribute, then you're going to lose everything. And they do. Then they also point out that Lot is with them, and they take Lot. They take Lot and all of his possessions, including his people and everything else. But I want to point out, and I want you to notice, the descent that Lot is taking at this point. If we look at, and we're not going to pull these verses up, you can just write them down and look them up yourself later, if you choose. look at the path that Lot is on. First, he chose to go towards the area of Sodom because of its beauty. We see that in chapter 13, verse 11. He camps near Sodom in verse 12 of chapter 13. And now we see that he has fully moved in to Sodom. Right here, right? In verse 12. In chapter 19, giving that away. I mean, we already read this, but giving away that he survives this, right? In chapter 19, we see that he is a respected member of Sodom. You just go down the line and gets into these areas where it's a beautiful region, but the sin is great. It can be pretty enticing, and Lot was falling into that. All right, now let's get to the rescue. 13 to 16. Then one who escaped, so people survived this, and one escaped and went to go tell Abram what was going on. So one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite. Now remember, Mamre was a village. Well, powerful people had lots of stuff. He created a village, but there was an actual person there as well, who was Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and Aner. These were allies of Abraham. But it means what it means, right? We know what that means. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house. Now, trained men, these were young men. By young, I don't mean like boys, right? But these were young men, mid-teens to early 30s, maybe early 30s, well within fighting age and strength. These were strong men. These were men who were trained to protect. Okay, when you'd have these kind of groups, you never knew when people were going to come in and fight. And so while they might do other things, they weren't just directly warriors only. They were trained in ways of fighting. They were trained in use of weaponry. They were trained in all of these things. And so these were trained men who were strong and able. Now, notice how this is written here. He led forth his trained men that were born in his house. The number here, as far as the text is concerned, this number is just Abraham's men. This is not including the men of Mamre, the men of Eshcol, and the men of Aner. Which means there was more than this. There were 318 trained men from Abram's house. When we say Abram was well off, he had made a lot of money and was doing well for himself. He had 318 that were military class men in his house, that were born there in his house. This guy is doing really well. Anyway, so he takes these 318 of them and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Now, side note on the 318, that was just from his thing. Could have been more, but 318 was actually a sizable number for a small military force. This isn't meant to be like the 300 Spartans taking on the Persians. Okay, this is meant to be recognized as this is a decent sized military force. Not they went crazy low numbers. This was a good number. This is an impressive number. This is indicating how well God has dealt with Abram, not Abram is foolish and trusting God in this. But he is. Not saying he's... That came out weird. Being in a... When people hear this, it isn't coming off like Abram is foolish and saying, God, just protect me while I go and do something dumb. Okay? This is, God, thank you for your provisions. We're going to go take care of this. Okay? There's a reason why they haven't even brought God into this picture yet. This is a sizable force that could go out and do something. Okay, that's the indication of what you should be taking from here. Now, Dan is a modern, quote unquote, modern name. So this was Moses giving reference to the Israelites who were with him, giving them a modern name of the area where they were going so that they would understand what's going on. This is at the southern foot of Mount Hermon. So it's the northern edge of Palestine. So they went pretty far. They followed them pretty far. Mount Hermon, northern edge of Palestine, that is Syria and Lebanon. The southern area where Syria and Lebanon hit and touch. So right around there, pretty far up. Okay. And so 15, and he divided his forces against them by night. So it sounds like he flanked them on multiple sides, came in at night, cover of darkness. Not your normal military siege, but if you're going to just come in and do guerrilla warfare and wipe out a people group, not a people group, excuse me, but a military group who's killed multiple giant clans, all sorts of different people group, and then wiped out 5 kingdoms in one day, maybe you need a little bit of the element of surprise. Maybe you want that little element of surprise. So he separates and divides up his men and attacks at nightfall. So hits them by surprise and wins. So he divides up his forces against them by night and his servants and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. So continued to follow them out past and even north of Damascus. And then he brought back, as he wins, right? Brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. Okay. So these 4 major kings had captured women, children, older, whatever, anyone that they thought could be a slave or that they could do anything else with, which, by the way, yes, that sounds horrific. Please put your mind into the time frame. That was normal. That was normal basically everywhere on earth. Everywhere on earth, that was the normal for society. If your kingdom was sacked and you were captured, hello, you're a slave. Welcome to it. That's what it was. But Abram then collects everything and takes it back. Now, when they're coming back, we get into 17 to 24, but we're just going to start at 17 to 20, break this up a couple spots. 17 to 20. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer, which means his defeating Chedorlaomer, not Chedorlaomer defeating Abram. After the defeat of Chedorlaomer, Abram returns, and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom, went out to meet him at the valley of Shavah. That is the King's Valley. Now, the King's Valley, where's that? Now, the King's Valley, we're a couple different valleys and areas where this could be. Most likely, this is the Kidron Valley, which is the valley between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives, or Gethsemane. Gives you this nice little place. It's basically at Jerusalem. So they have gone from the very tip of Palestine, Syria-Lebanon border, and gone all the way down to Jerusalem. By car today, this is over a 5-hour drive. Give you an idea of how far they pursued them and are coming back, okay? They came back to the King's Valley. Verse 18. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. Let's just stop there for a second. Salem means peace, and it is believed that Salem is Jerusalem. That's another reason why we're saying it appears that they came all the way back to Jerusalem, because Salem is Jerusalem. And if Melchizedek is the priest king of Salem, Jerusalem, that valley, it only makes sense that valley is right there, and that's where they're at. Otherwise, why would Melchizedek come into the picture to do any of this? Verse 19, and he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Now, God Most High. In Hebrew, this is El Elyon. El is a very common thing throughout most Near Eastern cultures, including the Hebrews, okay, including the Israelites. El is a shortened way to say God, okay? So Elohim gets shortened to El. El means God. Okay, so this is a very normal way to do this. So when you read here with Melchizedek, El Elyon, God Most High. Elyon really does mean high. It can mean most high. It could be an actual physical thing, like something's high up. It could be a position and stature. It could be a designation of hierarchy, which in this case is a designation of hierarchy. Most people groups throughout the world were polytheistic. And so polytheistics also, if you go down the line, I don't know that I know of any, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say that there may be some polytheistic groups that believe that there's not a hierarchy and they're all basically the same, equal, more or less. Most are not that way. The vast majority are not that way. There is a hierarchy in some order. There is a God that would be higher up, that is the most high in polytheistic groups. So it makes sense here. You'd be saying God Most High. But we also see Most High as recognition of God himself, the God of the Bible. Okay? So it could mean something physical, it could mean something metaphorical, or it could be a designation of hierarchy. Let's continue on 19 here. And he blessed him, meaning Melchizedek blessed Abram, and said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High," El Elyon, "possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." Now, why am I bringing up this El Elyon? Why are we bringing up the Hebrew? Why are we going into this? Why are we talking about what Elyon could mean and bringing other polytheistic beliefs into this? Well, there's kind of a debate. We're going to go a slightly different way with this than we did in Hebrews. So go back to Hebrews, the seventh lesson of Hebrews. In fact, it's even in Hebrews chapter 7. We'll take a look at that here in a little bit. Maybe it wasn't the seventh lesson. Maybe I'm just getting that back because because it was the 7th chapter. But it's in the 7th chapter. I believe it's titled Melchizedek. Like you can find it. Just dig through the stuff. But there is a little bit of a debate of who or what God, whether that be the capital G or a lowercase g, is Melchizedek a priest king of? Okay, it could be a Canaanite cult. It could be the cult of Shalim. It could be the cult of Sadek. It could be the cult of Elyon. It could be a few different things. Because again, Elyon is used elsewhere in the Old Testament to denote Yahweh, God, Yahweh, his name, including the combination El Elyon. We see evidence in this in Psalms. Actually, we see it in multiple different places in Psalms, but let's take a look at Psalm 110:4, where Melchizedek is brought into the picture again in Psalm 110:4, and using this as an indication that Melchizedek was talking about Yahweh. Okay, so Psalm 110:4, the Lord, Yahweh, has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Okay. Earlier in this lesson, we talked about and we discussed, hey, sometimes, especially here in the West, based on modernism and postmodernism and postmodernism, I don't know, it's weird. We have a tendency to try to mix the scripture up and to have it mean some things that it very clearly doesn't mean. And the best way to get the intended message out of the Bible is to take it as meaning what it very clearly means. And at times it very clearly means something. First of all, Abram doesn't argue with Melchizedek about him following the God Most High. The same verbiage is used throughout the scriptures, multiple places in Psalms and in other Old Testament times. The Greek counterpart of Most High is used by Luke in multiple different places, denoting God, whether that is just Most High or God Most High. Okay, this is believed and seen. We see this transition go through all of the scriptures, going all the way through. God is considered most high, especially when we talk with anybody who's potentially has a background of paganism and polytheism. Why? Because it's a denotation that, okay, we see and we understand that you believe that there's other things, right? We would say that other things have power. If you believe in demonic possessions, if you believe in angels and demons, if you believe in some of these things, okay, they're in the spirit realm. They're doing things. They could be seen as powerful, sure. Well, God is more powerful. He's the most powerful. He's most high. Those aren't gods. They're different. There's only but one God. But if we're talking to people who are polytheistic, there's multiple gods. Okay, well, that's fine. But the God we worship is the most high. He is the top. He's the one that if there were others that had power, he was the one who gave it to them. They had to have been created. He's the one who created. Okay, instead of debating, which would be the way that we would like to do this in today's society here in the West, no, there's not. There's only one. No, there's not other gods. You're wrong. And we wonder why it's hard to get the message across. You can't just sit there and tell people you're wrong, you're stupid, and debate that. The old school way of doing this was very simple. Well, we worship the Most High. Yours had to have been created. And so ours is the top. The Bible in the Old Testament does not endorse polytheism, does not endorse multiple gods. It talks in ways when you talk about Elohim and things like that. It's not saying God. Elohim, again, means spirit. We've gone over this before. I know that. Elohim means spirit, not God. It's not the same thing. It's like squares and rectangles. Not every rectangle is a square. Not all Elohim are God. Okay, we go through that. So this is one of those areas where we need to look at the understandings of the text and how the text operates with this, because many theologians, I'm not going to say most, because it's not most, but there are quite a few theologians out there, and there's quite a few commentaries out there who are trying to say Melchizedek was a priest king over a cult. Well, we have issues with that throughout the text. One, again, Abram doesn't argue with him about this. He seems to accept that. And if we go down into the next section in 21, 22, and beyond, he uses the exact same terminology and the exact same verbiage, okay, denoting God. So he seems to embrace this concept of God and that Melchizedek is with God. We see again in Psalm 110, the Psalm of David, pointing towards the future Messiah and being of the order of Melchizedek. We see in Hebrews, going all the way into the New Testament, that the order of Melchizedek is used as a reason for why Jesus could actually be the high priest. Okay? So, biblically, when we go through this, it was accepted and taken and believed that Melchizedek was a priest of God, Yahweh. Not some Canaanite cult, not something like that. Okay, this is one of those sections to where sometimes we want to outthink ourselves and we create problems, okay? This is not that, because you start going through that and it's like, but God approaches Abram and starts with this with Abram. How could there have been a priest of God? Even the Greeks, when Paul was going through and said, hey, I see you have an unknown God. That's who we worship. That's who I worship. He's the one who actually created everything and did everything. This is a priest who understood God, not the rest of these pagan cults and going and doing this stuff. Through the text itself accepts that Melchizedek was a priest of God. If the text accepts that, quite frankly, we need to accept that as well. That is what's going through here into the Psalms and into the New Testament in Hebrews, where it's used as evidence of Jesus being the Messiah. If we try to say he's not, that starts to hinder a lot of other different things. The text accepts this. We need to accept this and move forward, okay? This actually then finishes, and Abram gave a tenth of everything in the last bit of verse 20. Okay. Well, let's actually go back. Let's go back. We brought Hebrews into this. Let's take a look at this. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 7. We're just going to do a couple little snippets of it here. The beginning of chapter 7, verses 1 to 3. For Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessed him. And to him Abraham appointed a tenth part of everything. He is first, by translation of his name, king of righteousness, and then he is also king of Salem, that is, king of peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God. Repeat that. But resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. Let's skip forward to verses 15 to 17. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek. Now look at that. It's kind of a circular reasoning, but look at this. Melchizedek, resembling the Son of God, 15, becomes more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, circling back, who has become a priest not on the basis of legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life, for it is witnessed of him. And then they pull back from Psalms. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. They all link together into this. They all link together into this. Okay? And Abram gave Melchizedek a tribute, a tithe, a 10%, giving it towards God for what God had done. Let's continue on, 21 to 24. Let's wrap it up. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, now notice the difference here. Notice the difference between Melchizedek and Sodom. The king of Sodom shows up. Melchizedek shows up. Melchizedek's section sandwiched by Sodom. Sodom robs them. Yep, okay. Melchizedek comes in bringing bread and wine and a blessing. Sodom then turns around after the blessing and says, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. By the way, look back to the blessing. Verse 19, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. Verse 22, but Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, young men being his young able-bodied men who were his warriors, and the share of the men who went with me, meaning their portions. Let Aner, Eshol, and Mamre take their shares. Could add as well. Okay, there it is. Now, couple things to point out here. We've already kind of pointed out the sandwiching effect, the difference between Melchizedek's approach to him and the king of Sodom's approach to him. But something that we really kind of want to point out, because this is in the text, and depending on your translation, it might show up a little differently here. Verse 22, I have lifted my hand to the Lord, all caps Lord, which would indicate Yahweh. Get into everything else might say Adonai or anything like that. But anyway, it indicates that the name of the Lord is present, Yahweh. There's an issue with that. There's an issue with that. The Masoretic text, in fact, most of the translations of the Masoretic text have it, but nothing else does. Nothing else does. The original Greek doesn't have it. Now remember, this wasn't originally in Greek, but the original Greek translation doesn't have it. The Syriac doesn't have it. The Dead Sea Scrolls doesn't have it. The Samaritan Pentateuch doesn't have it. Everything else here, every other translation, mirrors Melchizedek's. It mirrors, and it says, I have lifted my hand to God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. It mirrors what Melchizedek says. It's believed that this is actually a later kind of a clarifying note done with an editor, not really an editor, excuse me, but a translator, a scribe who's going through this and just wants to add it in there as a clarifying note that this is actually pointing to Yahweh, God Most High, like the God, not just a pagan god. It's a clarifying note, which is part of the reason why I think it's still in the ESV, is a clarifying note that, yes, this is pointing towards Yahweh, not saying that Abram went back and started lifting his hands and started doing pagan worship again, okay? Because that's all it is, just clarifying. It doesn't change the text that it's there. That's why it's embraced and it's okay for it to be there, because it doesn't change the narrative, it doesn't change the story. All it does is clarify it, and that's okay. So I just wanted to point that out, though, that word, Lord, that Yahweh that is there is nowhere else. Okay. Now, Melchizedek gives a blessing and gifts. The king of Sodom gives a command. It's not a heartfelt praise. Okay. Sometimes it's really easy to read this with Western eyes and say, oh, the king of Sodom's like, hey, you know what? I just want the people. That's fine. Just give me my people back. You have everything else. Like this is a blessing. This is a praise. But it's not. The way the king of Sodom is coming about this is intended to be understood as the king of Sodom is trying to gain authority. And Abram sees this, and Abram's response shows that. He says, I would not take. So Abram went in to save Lot. He didn't go and get rich. He didn't go to save Sodom and Gomorrah. He didn't do that stuff. He went to save Lot, not get rich off of the tainted spoils that come from Sodom. Because everything that they took came from Sodom and Gomorrah and those other lands, these evil lands. He doesn't want to get rich off of that. That's not how he's doing this. But, however, his young men are his responsibility. They're Abram's responsibility. That includes that he needs to do something with that and provide for them. And they risked their life for him. So he includes what they've eaten and suggests that those that were with him should take their share. So maybe my young men can take their accepted share. They'll take their little shares. I'm not going to take a big chunk. I'm not going to take the whole thing. But let my men who risk their lives take their shares. And also let the brothers, Aner, Eshol, and Mamre, take their shares as well. This is to show Abram is trusting in God to provide, not sinful man. And yet he's also being generous and showing that, hey, these other guys came and helped too. Let them take their shares. I'm not doing it because that's not why I did this, not what I'm doing. I told God I wouldn't do it so that you can't turn around and say, you made me rich. You can't take credit for this. I told God it's God's credit, not your credit. That's the only time we get God in this. This is where we get God in this story. The battles all happen, and Abram turns around and says, no. I told God that it's fine. I'm not going to get rich from you, king of Sodom. Everything comes from God. He gives credit to God. All right. What can we take away from this? So we see a devastating military force sweep through the area, killing tribes known for their warriors and their vast size. Like they're big people, whether they're giants of 8, 10, 15 feet, whatever, it doesn't matter. But warriors that are known for their size and their skill. And this vast army and this devastating army comes in and wipes them out. And they easily defeat Sodom and Gomorrah and the other 3 kingdoms as well. And they take Lot as their prisoner. You see, Abram trusts the Lord to protect him and his men, and he goes to get Lot back. This group, with God's help, defeat the army that wiped out the entire region, and they get Lot and all that plunder of possessions and lives back. By the way, when the king of Sodom said, give me the people, again, that's negus, that's just lives, anything, including livestock, all living. Okay. We also see the king of Sodom, while offering a generous reward, sought to show his power and superiority over Abram. But Abram gave glory and honor to God and didn't take anything for himself from the plunder. Finally, Melchizedek blessed Abram and also gave glory to God for his success. So before denying the king of Sodom, Abram gave a tithe to the priest king Melchizedek, who was resembling the Son of God. Thank you, Lord, today for your word. Thank you for this portion of it and showing evidence and linking things throughout your word all the way through with how this works together and how this fits and how this comes to your glory and to the glory of Jesus. We thank you so much for this. We ask that you be with us today as we go out. We ask that you take us with you where you're going. Send us where you want us to go and have us do what it is that you want us to do. We ask for all of this in your Son Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you guys so much. Hope you got something out of it. We'll see you next time. Have a great weekend. God bless and